Yeah, so today we're going to talk about creating a consumer grade experience within the L&D. We're going to talk about both the technology as well as non-technical technology elements that you can do to really drive that consumer grade experience. We'll talk about what that means, why it's important, and all that other stuff. But that's really the goal of the webinar today. A little bit about myself here. Click there. My name is James Lindberg. I'm the VP of Sales for North America here at Thrive. And really, I've been in this industry for a while. I've talked with hundreds and hundreds of organizations. And a lot of what we'll talk today is a lot of the problems that they have and how some of the other technologies and other best practices and different industries would be able to assist with those. So one thing I'd love to start with is just what do we mean by consumer grade learning experience? It's a little bit counterintuitive because in most industries, if you're thinking of bikes, if you're thinking of tools, power tools, if you're thinking of trucks or even kitchen equipment, there's the pro grade or professional grade, and then there's consumer grade. And most people, all else being equal, if they cost the same and did the same, the professional grade would be the better of the two. It's going to be built for people that use it every day, so it'll be more durable. It'll have better features and functionality. It's really built for somebody to do everything that they want. And kind of the example we've put up here is a couple different bikes. The off-road bike is probably built with carbon fiber, so it can go through the bumps and the turns. Whereas the consumer grade bike is fairly lightweight. It's built for a different purpose. It's built to take somebody on a short journey from one place to another. But it's a little bit different when we're talking about experiences, and in particular, digital experiences, because oftentimes there's the ability for organizations to put forward a platform that's maybe not up to par with the experiences that people have in their normal life. And think of things like Facebook with their great conversations or layout, or Amazon with their recommendations or their communication channels, Spotify with how well they're able to personalize everything and really tailor the experience to what you're looking for, or TikTok, where it makes it super simple to do user-generated content. I was going to say, even a kid could do that. Mostly kids do that. So a lot of those experiences are what people are used to. They deal with that every day. They choose to interact with those systems. And then when they go to their work environment, they're presented with systems. And this isn't just L&D, this is across the board, where they're not really have that same type of engagement. There's not the same elements that make those platforms so likable, so usable, so functional in their work environment. So even though there's kind of the pro and the consumer grade as well, what we're really going to talk today is about how how L&D can take some of those great things in the consumer grade and incorporate them into their practice. So before I jump into the different tips and tricks and ideas of how that can be done, really want to talk a little bit about why this matters. So first off, the big thing that L&D is looking to do is help people become better at their jobs. It's a business function, and the goal of L&D is to help drive the business through learning, and that's a really important function in the business, and it's something that people want. I think a lot of times people think of L&D as a compliance type driver, but more and more employees are viewing it as a way that they can get skills. One of the more interesting studies I've run across, and there's a lot of different ones out there that say similar things, but is around the Gartner report talking about 70% of employees do not believe that they have the skills they need today at the moment in the job that they're in. That's kind of a crazy number, 70%. That study actually went on to say that 80% don't think that they have the jobs or the skills that they need for the next step. So people recognize that this is self-reported. This isn't their manager saying that they don't have these skills. This is self-reported. So people recognize that there is a gap there, and they understand that training is the path to fixing that. Again, about 3/4 of people want more training. They desire that experience to drive better learning, to increase those skills. There's a variety of reasons for that we're all aware of. They want more control over their career, over their path. They want to be able to move within the organization, both laterally, maybe to a different role, as well as up through promotions. And the path to skills is really important there. One of the more interesting things you see in a lot of these studies is that younger people actually value this more. When we're talking about consumer grade technology, it's the younger people that are interacting with that. And they're also coincidentally the ones that are desiring to have more training within the workplace. So the obvious question then is if the organization allows or has set up a training department, and they've created and provided a lot of tools, and the individuals recognize that there is a gap in their skills, and they recognize that training is the solution to that gap, then why aren't they actually utilizing them? Only about 25% of employees, according to McKinsey, think that the current training processes within their organizations are giving them the skills that they need to impact the business. So even though the majority of them think that there is a deficiency, training is the path to solving that deficiency, the vast majority of them don't think that it's set up to do that within the organization. Where do they go from there? So if someone has a skill gap that they've self-identified, they want to fix that, they don't think the organization can solve that, well, then they go to Google. Google is by far the most utilized learning platform in every industry. I would be confident in saying that it's the biggest learning platform in every organization. It's where people go. And a big part of that is because it's easy. It's very, very consumer grade technology. It's kind of the pinnacle of consumer grade technology. You go there, you ask a question, you have answers, they're sorted, they're tailored to what you're looking for. And so how is it that an organization competes with that, or do they even want to? And I think what we'll talk through over the next few slides is really this idea that they can. There's value to an organization doing more than just Google. How they can curate and how they can provide their own content that's really relevant and pathways and really make it personal. But there's also the ability, or there's also the what's the word I'm looking for? A couple lessons that we can take from Google and similar platforms that will really help that experience. So the first one, and this sounds super simple, but we'll talk about why it's often not, is make it easy. I say make it as easy as a 12-year-old or easy enough for a 12-year-old, but that's kind of an arbitrary number. I mean, if you look on any social media platform, there's people younger and older than that. But it should be drop dead simple. The reason behind this is that people go to a platform, whatever it is, type of platform, for a particular reason. So for instance, on the left here, if they go to Amazon, they're looking to buy something. They don't want to have to sort through menu after menu after menu after menu after menu to get to where they want. So even something like Amazon, which is infinitely complex, can make that really easy so that a 12-year-old could go on, find out what they want to buy, add it to their cart, and complete the process, assuming they had a credit card, of course. And they've done that at every step, as they've made it very, very simple. I mean, the whole one-click to buy is a perfect example of that, where it's not the technology that's really changed, it's the experience. Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, they operate largely the same, where anybody can go on. They walk you through. They make it really, really, really simple. One thing I'll point out is that part of the reason that often, well, I won't say part of the reason, oftentimes one of the reasons LMSs and learning experiences aren't as simple as social media posts and platforms is because that's not the audience that's actually buying them. When somebody's making an LMS, they are selling that LMS to an organization, and that the purchaser is oftentimes the L&D department, which makes logical sense. But those people are professionals. That is core to their job. They're asking for a lot of functionality. They need a lot of different check boxes to be checked. So what you end up with is a very complex piece of software. It might serve the needs of L&D, but the people that are actually taking the courses, they're not professional, L&D professionals. They're just not professionals in that field. They just want to go and get their information. One of the examples I think is a kind of a good comparison is if you look at a company like Intuit. If you're not familiar with Intuit, they're a software provider. They do tax and accounting software. But they have a suite of products, and they have one, TurboTax, that's really designed for consumers. And I don't know if anybody here has actually used TurboTax, but it is drop dead simple. Everyone thinks of filing your taxes as one of the most complex things. I mean, I think every sitcom has brought that up of, it's so I got to do my taxes. What am I going to do? But if you've ever actually sat down with TurboTax, they just walk you through. They ask you plain language questions. There's no tax code that you see. If you have questions, there's an easy menu that pops up and tells you what to put. Quite literally, a bright middle schooler could file taxes through TurboTax, assuming it's not too complex. But it is a very, very easy system that hides a lot of that complexity. The same company also makes QuickBooks. QuickBooks is relatively easy to use compared to other financial systems, but it's not one that most people would be able to sit down and get a whole lot of value out of, because that's not who it's designed for. It's designed for finance people in small to medium-sized businesses, where that's what they do. It's so critical to their job functionality that they are expected to take the time to really learn the system, to learn the foundations of how it works, the ins and out, all the different menus. It's the same thing with, say, engineers and learning a CAD program. Very complex system, far beyond what an average person could just sit down and get value out of, right away. There's a very big learning curve there. However, if you have a system that's designed for non-professionals to use, where they just need to come in, grab something, and then be able to move on with their day doing whatever role that they are actually professionals in, it should be really simple. And one of the great examples I've come across, and I've put it here on the right here, is actually a system called Workday. I think a lot of people are very familiar with Workday. If you're not, it's an HCM system, so that stands for Human Capital Management. It manages everything from payroll to time off to hiring and talent, to movers and leavers. It manages all of the people. It tends to be utilized by very large organizations with really complex organizational structures. It is a very complex piece of software. However, when a user logs in, here's an example of the menu that they see over on the right there. That couldn't be more simple. There's a few big boxes, icons with text. It basically directs you to where you need to go or where you want to go. They make it drop dead simple. The back end isn't as simple because that's where the professionals are interacting. They're expected to know that system inside and out. But the front end could not be more simple. So that's an example of, one of the ways that you can add simplicity, even if it's a complex use case. I think a lot of people have this idea that as you add complexity, it has to get more complex for everybody, but it really doesn't. There are right ways to do that. Next one I wanted to talk about was people-oriented. And This one I think is, I almost put social here, but I think that that's kind of the wrong message. It's around being people oriented. And this is something that I think is become more and more clear is something that's really critical over the last year and a half or so, where content or platforms or experiences or engagement that are just feel like you're doing them in a silo and there's no real interactions, are not really conducive to get people to come back. That's not an experience that pulls people back, that makes them want it to re-engage. Personal anecdote: the first time when I started my career, I had to do training like everybody does, and did quite a few e-learnings. And it was a ways into it when I realized that those well thought out answers that I added to the sections that asked for, response, not only did they not go anywhere or were they not used, they weren't even saved. The moment I hit the next button, they were just gone. That was a bit of a letdown. I put real thought into those answers, and I know that that's the point of an open-ended response in something like that. But at the same time, it felt like they were deceiving me, like there was going to be a way that we could share this, or someone would review, or there would be feedback, and there just wasn't. And part of what makes training social or personal is whether it's social, whether it's interacting, whether it's user generated content. There's a lot of different ways to do this. I think one of the more interesting ways I've ever seen was, this was years ago. There was an interactive video company that had, there was a printer company that had a new printer that they were getting ready to release. They wanted to train up their salespeople. Rather than just give them a manual of, hey, here's all these cool features of a printer, which I couldn't imagine anything as boring as printer features, and really getting into all the details there, is what they had was they had an interactive video where people were asking questions, or an individual in the video was essentially the buyer, and they would get going, and there would be certain elements where they would stop, and the whole team would have to submit their own videos and review them and provide feedback. And it was just a really good use of making it personal, where people were putting a lot of thought, they're putting a lot of just consideration into what they were saying and how they would answer. They were really internalizing and trying to follow the lesson in order to do well there, because they knew everybody else would see it, and they wanted it to be a good representation of what it is that they would do. So just using things like user-generated content, social feedback is really important. Keeping people in mind as they go through is kind of a lesson there. The other one is around hyper-personalization. And I don't say just personalization here, because I think that's a bit of a buzzword in the industry that doesn't really capture what it means to be hyper-personalized. And a lot of these platforms, that this is what makes the difference between a good tool and a bad tool, is how personalized, how easy is it to find what's actually relevant to me. So the example I wanted to kind of point out on this one is Spotify. So Spotify knows that me individually, that I like country music, and please don't judge me if you don't. But it also knows that I don't like necessarily kind of pop country like Brad Paisley. So they're not going to show me Brad Paisley. They're going to show me people like Chris Knight and more people along those lines, because it knows me at a really pretty deep level based on what I listen to. And now they've gone into podcasts, and now they know even more about me, and they've really helped to personalize that. One of the quotes I really loved from their VP of Global Strategy, a guy named Alex Underwood, there was, personalization should be a trigger to inspire positive emotional resonance and reaction. And I really read that as basically it should be like it knows you, like it's almost, I won't say a friend, but that it understands what it is that you're looking for, and causes you to do something. In this case, consume something that that you like, that you enjoy. And when it comes to learning, it's kind of the same. How do you hyper personalize something for somebody? Well, it starts with really understanding who they are, understanding what their role is. If you're delivering, say, leadership training, you don't want to just toss every piece of leadership resource or course that you have at them. That's going to be overwhelming. You really want to tailor it to that individual. What part of leadership are they struggling with? This gets down to, what is their role? What do they need to know? It's also, how do they like to consume that content? If you're putting out e-learnings over and over, and most people within, say, the sales org would prefer video, it's not really personalized to them, because it's not the way that they're going to really find a positive emotional resonance with that piece of content. Go to the next one. This is really kind of the last one I really want to show as far as topics here, but this is really know what a good outcome is. This is one I see all the time. Somebody will introduce a new platform and it'll make a lot of promises, and then they'll say, well, we didn't have much engagement, say with user-generated content, only a few people actually utilize that. But that's not necessarily the right measure. When you're looking at, what do these consumer grade tools know that professionals can know, part of it is around what's important and what do we measure. So with something like that, there's a kind of an old rule of thumb within social media that 90% of the people are lurkers. They still find value in the platform. It's still engaging to them. They come back, but they're just lurking. They're consuming content that others have created or posted or commented on, but they're lurkers. 9% are occasional users. So they might leave some comments. And only about 1% of people are the real users. They're driving everything else in that environment. So when people create a great piece of content, or have an experience where they want everyone to provide feedback, if they get a small number, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's a bad thing. You just have to kind of consider that in context of, okay, well, what's realistic, and then are those lurkers finding value as well? Because just because they didn't contribute doesn't mean that they didn't find value in the system. So kind of reconfiguring the expectations, and the expectations, I think really would help, and make it easier for people to understand what's really happening there. And that's the four main I wanted to touch on today. Like I said, I want to go quick. One thing I'll say is, when I've talked to other people, they say, well, who's doing it right? Or who's really, doing this very well, or what's an example we could look to? And while being the VP of sales at Thrive, you probably expect me to say Thrive, and we do a lot of this. Thought that'd be a bit corny. So the one I'm always really impressed with, and I'll show this now, is it's actually a different e-learning platform, but it's Duolingo. Duolingo, I think, does this better than any platform I've ever seen, where, if we get started, it couldn't be more simple. This isn't a drop-down menu with languages. They've gone very visual. There's icons with words. I can pick any language here. I can see the other, how many other people are doing it. They're making it personal right off the bat. I'll just select some answers here. They're asking me about why I'm looking to learn. They're going to use this later on when they're trying to engage me. This is how they're helping to hyper-personalize their communications. Here they're asking me of how do I want to engage. So this is around setting that expectation of what is it to measure. If I only want to do 5 minutes a day, and I do 5 minutes a day, well, that's a success. Even if that's not a great metric on their end, or I'm at the lower bound of the users. If I'm hitting my metrics, that's what's keeping me back day in, day out, that's perfect. When I go here, just continue here. Oh, just get out of here. there's one menu I want to show here where they're actually showing me, do I want to check my level here or start from scratch? So this gives me the ability to further personalize my experience, where they're actually tailoring it to my level, because I might have taken a few classes years ago, I can skip a little bit, etc. And then they'll walk me through. There's a whole social section. They do this very well. This is an example of all of the key concept of consumer grade learning that can be utilized very well. So with that, I know I said 25 minutes and we are right at 25 minutes, but I'll end it here. I will say I will be writing kind of a blog post on a lot of this findings either next week or the week after, and I'll always love continuing the conversation. This is something that I talk through quickly because I actually find this very interesting, and it's a big trend in the industry at the moment around how do we make this more engaging and more social and more consumer, but nobody's has that everything figured out. This is definitely a moving target that I think everybody is aware of, and I love hearing ideas from other people. One thing I'll say is I think a lot of people hear consumer grade and they think Netflix of learning, and I almost got through the whole entire presentation without saying that phrase, which I hate, and I think it makes everybody's eyes roll, because when they think Netflix of learning, they what they really mean is a ton of content thrown together in pretty boxes. They're not talking about how do we make that simple, how do we make that personalized, how do we really make that engaging. They're just thinking tons of content, pretty boxes and rows, and there's so much more to that when you really get into what the consumer grade means and how L&D side, L&D professionals can utilize that. So I'll pause here. Cass, any questions that have come up? Anything I can answer?
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking us through that, James. Yeah, we've got some questions here, and we've got a few minutes to answer them. So the first question we've got here is, what advice do you have to encourage those lurkers to contribute to content and knowledge? So I know we had that you had that conversation about the fact that on social platforms and forums, the majority of people are lurkers, and we know that from the internet and social media. But what advice do you have to encourage more engagement, I guess, is the question.
Yeah, so a lot of this is around nudging, whether it's better communication that's more tailored to them, come back and do something specific, or it's just making it easier and more attractive. So using the other principles will help drive that. But it's also the expectation that not everybody's going to be a contributor, and that's okay. Just because they're not a contributor, they can still get a lot of value out of the platform. And I think it's part of that question is, how do we measure the lurkers and how do we measure what they're getting out of it? And maybe it's just a different way.
And that links very nicely to the next question, which is exactly that. What are some ideas to be able to measure those lurkers?
Yeah, so when you look at any social media site, one of the things that they measure a lot of is how much consumption there is. I know in L&D that's a bit of a double-edged sword. I mean, how much content somebody views matters, but being able to tie that back to performance is very, very difficult. I would say in an ideal world, and again, this is part of a much larger conversation around analytics in the L&D space. In an ideal world, you're actually measuring a little bit of both. You're tying what those lurkers are looking at, how long they're lurking, and then how their performance is improving. Again, I know I'm just scratching the surface there. That is a much bigger conversation around performance and data and all of that. But we'll leave that part for another day.
Thank you. Hopefully that answered your question. We've got one more question here asking, you mentioned L&D teams have complex requirements out of necessity, but need to simplify. Are there any hot tips on how to?
Yes. So there's certain things that just cannot be, changed. If you're let's just say a restaurant, in the restaurant industry, you have to do, food handling safety. You have to do that. But I think a lot of companies create over complexity with things like the leadership, where they look at number of titles or the number of resources that they have available as a benefit. And it's almost like that old adage, quantity has a quality all of its own. When you're looking at creating a simplified experience for people, that's actually kind of the opposite, where quantity, while it might sound good on paper, isn't really what you're going for there. What you're going for there is just a much more tailored experience that's easier to get into. And honestly, not having 16,000 or 20,000 titles is oftentimes the way to do that. Really focus on the ones that are driving the learning.
Really good advice there. And I know we've reached past, but I think we've got time for a couple more. So question here, you mentioned earlier hyper personalization. I'd be interested to understand the difference between hyper personalization and personalization. And then the question here is, what does that look like within a platform like Thrive?
Yeah, so I really took that as a hyper personalization is kind of that next level down. If you think of a kind of a filter menu, it's really easy to filter by, James is in sales, he needs sales skills, but it's what's that next level down of personalization? What sales skills specifically does he need? What is he interested in? What's going to drive him? What's the modality that he's going to prefer? Is it going to be video? Is it going to be e-learning? And really taking just that next step. And there's always another way that you can do it. One of my more recent conversations was with a CLO talking about how excited they were that they had 16,000 titles, and they had a senior management team, and they were talking about that. And hey, now everybody in this org has access to all of this. And everyone was quite pleased until the CEO asked, well, what are the three that matter to me? And that kind of put a pause on it. So again, there is no silver bullet for any of these, but with this, it's really looking at, okay, well, we know generally what it is that they want to learn or what they need to learn. How can we tailor that down even further and find, just for sake of keeping the story going, how do we find the three for that person?
Awesome. And then one last question I've got for you here, James, is when it comes to Thrive, did any of these platforms that you're speaking about today inspire the consumer grade experience within Thrive?
Yeah, they continue to. I mean, one of the things that we constantly fighting is, like I said at the outset, I mean, we sell to L&D departments. They're used to complex menus and navigation systems and 50,000 different options. We've really reduced all of that. I mean, one of the things I think is just an example of that is the way that we add content. Everything, all of the content from the platform, whether added by an admin or by a user, is all done through the front page, much like it would be done through, say, TikTok or Instagram. There is no back end that's complex and ugly where they can add everything and do all of that. It's all done right, simply from the homepage with all of the tags and sharing and all of the rules attached right there. So yeah, it's something that not only have we done, it's something that we are constantly wary of, and not wary of, just conscious of as we're building this, is how do we keep it simple, and how do we really drive this to be an easier platform for everybody, but in particular for the users, because they're not professional platform users.
Amazing. I think we will wrap it up there. If there's any more questions from anyone in the audience, please ask them now. Otherwise, I would like to say that our next webinar is going to be on the 26th of May. I'm just going to send a link in the chat for anyone that would like to sign up. We'll be teaming up with Ted Baker on that. So they've launched their first ever piece of global HR tech, and we're going to be sharing how they've reinvented learning and development of their organisation. And we're going to be teaming up with Debbie Frierson, who's their digital development partner, and sharing some do's and don'ts on what they've learned from their global tech launch. So if anyone on here today wants to join us for the next one, it's the 26th of May, and that's 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So it's an early one because we're working UK and US times, as I'm sure everyone who's joined has kind of heard from my accent maybe. So yeah, all that's left to say is thank you so much for everyone joining, and thank you, James, for taking us through that. If you have any questions in the meantime, James has shared his email address on the screen there, and you can also find him on LinkedIn if anyone wants to connect. And yeah, thank you very much, and we hope to see you all on the next webinar and speak to you all soon.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks,
Thanks,
Cass.
James.
Take
Bye,
care.
everyone.